Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Pension Fund Committee meeting. County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures or share on social media during the meeting. Please, though, can everyone present turn their phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting. We will leave the room by the side doors and use the external fire exit to the assembly point in the car park. I would remind everyone present that this meeting will be live streamed and a recording will be placed on the Council's website. The meeting will be adjourned every 2 hours for a short comfort break. Item 1 is apologies for absence and declarations of interests. Democratic Service Officer, report any apologies, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Batchelor, from Councillor MacDonald, who is substituted by Councillor Wood, and from Howard Nelson. Thank you.
Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I've just received a phone call from Alan Sharp. He's caught in heavy traffic, so he gives his apologies. He will be late, but he will attend.
Thank you for that. Moving on, does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest?
Chairman, I'm an active member of the scheme and my wife is a retired member of the scheme.
Thank you for that. Okay, we'll move on to item 2. We're being asked to approve the public minutes of the Pension Fund Committee meeting on the 18th of July. Sorry.
Also an active member.
Thank you for that. Right, so being asked to approve the public minutes of the Pension Fund Committee meeting on the 18th of July as an accurate record. If any member disagrees, please indicate now. Right, I see no objection, so we will take that as carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 3 is petitions and public questions. None have been received. So we'll move on to item 4, which is the Administration Performance Report. The report will be introduced by the Governance and Regulations Manager.
Okay, thank you. So this is the standard administration report. So I'll just pick out the key details.
Michelle, could I ask you to move the microphone closer, please?
Sorry, is that better? So for this period, as you'll see from the report, we've had 12 KPIs that have not been met, 8 of those amber and 4 red. As with previous issues that we've reported, factors such as inexperience within the team, vacancies, McLeod and sickness have all contributed to this. This particular quarter, there's also been an issue with some prioritisation of cases, but this has already been addressed within the service. In line with previous reporting, the reds that we see are in relation to the estimates, and we do expect to see this for some time. Obviously, the prioritisation of cases is where we have continuity of income. So we are still working on estimates, but they are lower priority in terms of the casework. Also with estimates, members do have the opportunity to run their own estimates through member self-service as well. So there is another option for members. We also, if an estimate is deemed important in terms of timescale, in terms of people retiring, we would obviously prioritise those ones as well. So the ones that are really in the backlog are kind of the ones where they're not retiring in the near future. So we do offer member self-service as well. So as we've previously spoken about before, there were several things that we've done to obviously try and mitigate against some of these amber and red KPIs. One of them, what we previously mentioned, was about additional resource into the team. So as part of the March business plan, there was a request for some additional resource. So the current position at the moment is we've now managed to recruit 3 full-time positions and 1 part-time position. So that comprises of a training officer post, 2 pension officers and an administration assistant. 1 pension officer post remains vacant at the moment, and we're looking to recruit that one in the very near future. The training officer post in particular, we're hoping that once that person is fully up to speed, we'll obviously start to alleviate some of the pressures that we're seeing across the casework teams. Currently, training is delivered within each casework team, so that specialised role will remove some of that requirement there. Also on KPIs, to mention that we're also reviewing our KPIs against the SIPFA annual report, which was developed in conjunction with the Scheme Advisory Board. So the purpose of this was to look at a consistent and comparable reporting across the LGPS. The guidance sets out any must, should and may compliances, and the KPI element of that report is a must. So we've started looking at what that means and what it's going to look like for the fund. So we will definitely need an additional payment of refund KPI added, as that has been mandated. There are some flexibilities around target dates, but our software supplier has actually already started doing their insight reporting around actually the new SIPFA dates. So it probably makes sense that we do follow the national standards on those. We're aiming to bring the full suite of KPIs to you in March, so you can view those to see what they look like. And then we'll start from April onwards reporting against those KPIs so that we're compliant for the next annual report. Customer journey KPIs, as requested, we've added in some additional narrative to the table to provide some volumes. And last time, I think we kind of touched on the additional reporting that we're looking to do. So we've had some internal discussions around the next steps with reporting. So the intention is to identify any systemic issues that we're having with employers, and to start. The purpose is to kind of start the narrative and, well, to come up with the narrative and start having discussions around if there's anything that we can do to help in particular cases. The first thing that we need to do is obviously identify what we're going to class as a systemic issue, and obviously fully bearing in mind that actually some of the issues that we might start to see might be no fault of the employer at all, but at least we'll be able to come to you and explain what we found out from that analysis. The two areas that we're going to concentrate on first are the starters and leavers, because these are the easiest ones to look at in terms of pension administration, in the pure fact that there's only two connection points, us and the employer, via an iConnect system. So we'll obviously keep you updated of that development and let you know what the outcome of that is. Also in line with the previous action about target dates and changing the terminology. Now that we've reflected that in the administration report, for the next version of this report, we'll change the terminology to move away from target dates as well. Really quick mention about a breach of the law that's on there, really small one, 0.03% of the annual benefit statements were not issued, but when you compare that to the size of the fund, an achievement really, but obviously just to note that there is a really small breach there of a few complex cases that we couldn't get out on time. Two IDRP cases that have moved on since the date of the report. So the first one on the list has been upheld now, and the second one partially upheld. And as we've said before, anywhere we have upheld or partially upheld, they will be added to our Quality Assurance Board meeting and discussed where the issues have gone wrong on those ones. The general census with those is around the communication, not keeping members informed at the earliest opportunity. So that will be the lessons learned from those. And really just to mention and to draw your attention to the data improvement plan in the appendix, really just covering some of the key data activities that we're due to undertake over the upcoming period. Obviously, they link very closely into the project work that we're doing from a cloud and dashboards as well. And obviously, generally just improving customer experience. But they're the key details from the report. Happy to take any questions.
Chris or Della?
Yes, I'd just like to ask a question about Appendix 2. on page 30, and then the next one's on page 31. Inform members who leave the scheme at or after retirement age of the benefits due. In both of these, you give, you know, a percentage of failures, which were due to employer delays. And this happened in April, May, June, and July. And you say you're going to undertake analysis of this. Is it the same employer that's causing all these issues for you, or is it a variety of employers? Because, you know, we really need to get on top of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a good question. So at the moment, it's probably a combination of employers, but obviously the size of the employer. And obviously some of it actually might be when an employer has outsourced services to a different payroll provider as well. So there's all those complexities to the scheme employer actually has the overall responsibility, but actually some of the failures might be the payroll providers. So there might be a conversation there. But at the moment, because we're literally just starting the kind of analysis of that at the moment. I couldn't tell you, obviously, at this point, if, you know, some are, you know, the same employers or different, but that is exactly what we're hoping to bring back to you in the future so that we can actually say, you know, proportionally, this is what it looks like, and this is the action that we've taken to try and address it. And some of it might be, you know, quite easy things to address, and it just needs a conversation with an employer. I don't think we're at this stage saying we're going to, you know, come down hard, but obviously if it then continues, we might be having a different conversation with those employers.
If I could just make a general point on that as well, the larger the employer, obviously the more complex is what's going on under the hood, and so particularly for where Cambridgeshire County Council, for example, might outsource to West Northamptonshire payroll, the problem is sometimes it's the actual within the service who hasn't informed payroll what's exactly is going on. So it can get very, very complex, and it's not as simple as sometimes the employers fail to tell us on time. The employers fail to say because actually something's going on, you know, underneath within different departments within that employer. I just say that because there'd be an element of that within it as well.
Chris.
Thank you, Chair. If I may go back to Appendix 1 and the information provided on the provision of the estimate of benefits to employees during the year, and I'm grateful for the further information which was given. Within that further information, I may well have misunderstood. Am I correct in thinking that there is an automated way that members can manage to get this, or some members at least can manage to get this information?
Yes, that's correct. So we obviously take requests from members for estimates, but we actually really do try and encourage member self-service as well to all of our members. So effectively, Corey and his team at various points of the year try and promote member self-service and get as many people signed up to that as possible, which is a really secure portal that actually members could go on anytime and run estimates. So yes, there is another mechanism for that as well.
Chair, am I correct in thinking that the self-servers are not included in the numbers that we have in front of us?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, that puts these numbers in a slightly different context, maybe a substantially different context. Do we have any concept as to about how many people per month successfully use the self-service system?
I don't think we have that level of detail for estimate running. We obviously have, and we can bring to you what the current membership take up on member self-service is. We've done some analysis on that previously, but what I can do, I can check to see whether we can also get some indication of how many estimates are being run through that as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think that would actually be rather useful to know, because if these numbers represent only 10% of the total number of members wanting to get this information and 90% manage to get it successfully through the automated system, then that puts it in a very different context from if this represents 90% of the members and only 10% do it through the automated system. So if that information could be given in future iterations of this report, I think that would be a useful note I'm not asking for any change in the format that you do, but an extra note just to explain how many people have successfully used the self-service system, I think would be very useful. Because just looking at this starkly, and I looked at it before, I had the advantage of hearing the detailed report we were given. I looked at this and I saw that in this 4-month period, we're talking about 2 requests a day here. And my first thought was, well, who knows what sort of difficulties one might have with some of those requests. I can well imagine that in many cases we don't get all the information we need and there's all sorts of extra work to be done. But that's not what the KPI is. The KPI is how many, what proportion of these applicants, what proportion have had the information provided to them within 10 working days from the receipt of all information, not from the time they first make contact. And I find it difficult to understand why it is so difficult once we receive all of the necessary information to be able to provide the information about the benefits within 10 working days. And I just wonder, Chair, because this is not a new thing, it's not a new problem, and it's not going to be solved immediately either. I just wonder, Chair, if we could be provided at the next meeting with some more information about just why it is that it can take so long to produce something once we've got all the information, and when we've got a volume here of 2 requests per day, per working day.
Yes, and I think that's a valid point, and Mark might want to come in as well. But I think at the moment it's probably fair to say that we have quite a few conflicting priorities at the moment. We've got a lot of project work going on in terms of obviously dashboard and McLeod, and we've obviously got the other KPIs as well. So I think that's probably a factor that's feeding into that as well. But I don't know, Mark, if you want to add to that.
Oh, well, I was just going to say we also get estimates from employers, or estimate requests from employers. So in addition to this, we have to respond to those as well, and they can be regarding things like redundancy exercises. And so they obviously have there's usually a very clear deadline which the employer requires that information by, and sometimes they can be like 100 at a time, for example. And so then we agree a delivery date for those. So so beyond this KPI you're seeing here, you've obviously, as we've discussed, we've got the self-service, but then the other key thing which we actually have to do is the employer ones.
I think, Chair, that additional context is very helpful, but, and I'm putting this in a pejorative way, so my apologies, but it seems to me as though this particular task, providing employees with their estimate of benefits. And I must admit, looking at this, I thought in the whole of my working life, I think I had this once in the whole of my working life. So I think times may have changed in terms of how employees are more aware of pensions and ask for more information. But it just seems to me from the answers we've been given that this particular function is being given a low priority quite deliberately. I'm not saying it's wrong to give it a low priority, but a decision's been made that there are capacity issues, and this is a function which can be relegated to the back of the drawer. And I know I'm putting that in a slightly pejorative way, but that sounds as though what is actually happening here.
Okay, I think that we'll have a look at what can be provided and come back next time with what can be provided and then work from there. Okay, Lara.
Thank you, Chair. Before I ask my question, I agree that our next report on that KPI, I think, will be very interesting because so many of the vacancies will have been filled. I'm not as worried that they're red right now, but if they were red again in our next report, then I would have a lot greater concerns. My question is about 3.15. You mentioned in the non-material breaches that there is likely to be a change in legislation that will remove the 3-year requirement. Is it going to be moved to be more generous or less generous? So in which direction is that going to move? Or will there be no timeline on that as well? And then my second question is about Appendix 2. There is a % target on providing basic scheme information to new joiners. In the comments, it says the pension service is 100% within target. But then in the column that's within target, we have 4 percentages that are less than 100%. So could you tell me more about what the difference is between the two measures that are being described? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So in the non-material breach section, the comment on there about the statutory 5-year period has actually been on there for quite a while now, and it's one of those that keeps getting kind of pushed back a bit from government. We are of the understanding, well, earlier this year, we were told it probably wasn't likely to be this year now, but hopefully probably looking into 2025, but it will remove the requirement completely. So once that's gone, effectively, we will not have to report any of those breaches going forward to you. So that would be within the scheme rules there. And if you just bear with me, I'm just scrolling down to the second point. So how we're trying to do the customer KPIs is obviously we're looking at several parties within the customer journey and looking against the statutory deadlines. So what we've tried to do, and the information to new joiners, for example, is an example where we have automated processes in place. So effectively, because we run those so regularly, as long as we have the iConnect file on time, our processes will automatically pick that up in time because we've got all the information we need to be able to obviously process that. So where we have the issue is where and why they're not within target is because effectively this is one of those cases where we can fairly confidently say that they're all employer failures because our processes are automated and it gets generated straight from the iConnect file. So they're exactly the type of conversations we'll be having with employers on this new joiner information to say, well, we know that as soon as a file hits us, we're going to run that process that same week so that we know that's on target. But actually, what are some of the reasons that we're getting that information late to start with? And as kind of Mark said, it might be some genuine reasons that they've had information come through late from their end. It might be actually there are some issues that we can discuss with the employers. But obviously some of those targets are quite low. So the intention is to try and bring those up as much as we can, but probably bearing in mind that it's probably unlikely to be 100% because there's always obviously things that can affect iConnect files and payrolls. But if we can get that as good as we can, that's the intention with that.
Members, any other questions or points on this? Okay, Chris.
I'll ask a more general question, although it is specifically listed in the report. We have 4 or 5 or 6 complaints which are shown in the way they've gone through the complaints procedure, or stage 1, stage 2. And I'm interested to know, not necessarily in relation to these ones in particular, but generally, do we find that such complaints are as a result of the sort of error which unfortunately will happen in every system, one-off errors, or are there cases where there are systemic issues which are raised, and in which case do we have a robust feedback system to ensure that we actually learn the lessons that that have been uncovered by the report system?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's a bit of a mixture. So some of them are one-off cases where some of them we actually can't give a determination any other way because the regulations just don't allow for what, you know, the complaint that's come in. I'd probably say the more systemic side of complaints across all areas, and probably particularly in AVCs, and where we have the most influence and where there's been any breakdown in communications between us and the members. So they're the ones that we tend to look at a bit more closely in terms of actually what is the timeline of obviously this particular case. Have we kept the members up to date? Have we given them the right information at the right time to make informed decisions and all of that type of thing? And they're the ones that we more so look at as part of a quality assurance board. So they all get added to a quality assurance board list, and then we discuss those particular cases of what went wrong. If there's other cases as well, obviously that not necessarily down to communication, but other things that we can learn from, lessons learned. We also review any pension ombudsman determinations as well, just more widely and nationally to see, oh, that's happened, you know, over there. We need to, you know, keep an eye on that. So we do have a mechanism for kind of, you know, looking at what went wrong and trying to address it where we can.
Thank you. Okay, we're being asked to note the administration performance report and note the data improvement plan located in Appendix 5. And I trust we're happy to do so. Thank you. Just going back to item 2, I forgot to look at the action log. So officers, have you got any comments on the action log?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just the very first action, which was around it was a request which came in from Councillor Davenport Ray around the community wealth and whether we could actually do some reporting around that, and did think it was worthy of discussion. So the councillors shared an email around the 5 pillars and the kind of metrics that we could report against them. And I certainly thought there was merit in it, but I did think it was something that perhaps the Pensions Committee should discuss before deciding how they want to proceed. So if I may invite. Thank you.
Yes. So this is something I brought up at an earlier meeting. And I think it's important we maybe form a consensus on whether this is a topic that's important enough to us that we do want to see any more reporting on it. It is to me, but yeah, I'd like to hear my peers' comments. So community wealth building, the types of things we would be wanting to see are, for example, what percentage of our funds are invested in small enterprises, co-ops, what percentage of our fund is spent within Cambridgeshire, how does Cambridgeshire benefit in terms of employment and investment from our fund, how many of the pension staff live within Cambridgeshire, how many of them are paid a real living wage, you know, how many homes in Cambridgeshire have been funded through our pensions fund, and what proportion of those are social or part ownership. So I know these are a lot of topics that are discussed in the investment subcommittee. So it's a question of, do we think these indicators are important enough that we would want to know what those answers are in a meaningful way that might lead to how we would want to guide investment? So if I'm the only one who's interested in that, then I suppose we can close the action. But if others think these are important indicators as well for this committee or for the subcommittee, then I'd love to hear what thoughts are.
I think from my perspective, the information is certainly information I would be interested in. What I'm more concerned about is that there is the other side to it, which is the cost of actually achieving that aim. And it may be that it is completely disproportionate because of the fact that, you know, we've got such a diverse base. But we can certainly start from the point of asking the question. Members, any views on this?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder, my first question might be, are there any of these measures that we already have somewhere? And it's rather than commissioning the answers, is it, do we have it somewhere? It's just not all in the same place. That might be an alternative suggestion.
I think the first point would be to investigate exactly that and whether the information is readily available. And then, you know, we can make a, or perhaps have a debate on the value of actually achieving that additional information. Some of the information is probably relatively easy to obtain, but I would imagine that some of it would be of low quality and actually quite expensive to achieve, and therefore wouldn't achieve the aims that we're really looking at. We've certainly improved, I think, quite tremendously since I've been here, the kind of data that we're actually seeing. But how much further we can go, I think, if we could perhaps, officers, would it be in order to look at what of that data we already have and the availability, you know, whether that data would be available easily or whether it would take a project to actually understand that further. could we put that as a?
I'm very comfortable with that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's we obviously utilize the pool a lot to obtain information these days, which does help. I think, but a lot of this will be focused around, I guess, our local investments, which we're quite close to anyway. I think it's I think we can probably give some sort of basic information in this area quite easily. It's if we then want additional colour, this is where you're getting in probably into the realms of things like the good economy reports that other funds have commissioned, which I did mention. But I think as a starting point, we can probably obtain this in-house in a fairly straightforward manner. And some of it we will already know the answers to, as you've intimated.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I would agree with Lara that it would be beneficial to have this information if possible. It would be informative to us, but also it would demonstrate to the residents of Cambridgeshire that we are focusing on investing in our own area in useful positions. As has been said, it would be important to know if this information is already available. If it's not, and the cost of obtaining it would be too extreme, then it could be placed as a longer term aim when to achieve sometime in the future. And when we look at restructuring our information, that could be considered.
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly, I think there's one or two of the questions you've asked could be very difficult if we wanted to be really pernickety about this. I mean, there's investments that are in national things through the access pool, through LAPV, and digging down to what's local would just be a huge task. Some of the questions you asked, I thought sounded very easy to answer. I mean, you asked, did I hear how many of the pensions staff were on the real living wage? I'd have thought hopefully we could very quickly say, well, yes, all of them. But yeah, I don't know. And there are some things that are specific to this, which we could probably dig down. So, I mean, for instance, the Foresight Fund seems to be relevant to the questions here. And yeah, of course, we know what that is, and we should have some handle on what of that is local. So, yeah, thanks.
Okay, hopefully we can look a little forward, Liz.
Just another thought. I think residents would value that information, but also I think it might quite rightly open up lots of other questions about how what information they have and what they understand, which would be beneficial, because I think people should understand as much as possible about how the investments that their pensions are involved in. So I do think it's perhaps a longer term project, but I think it could add value, but also raise lots of other questions.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I ask a question on a different action log item, if we've concluded that part? I was hoping to see a particular action that I don't see here. At our last meeting, Mercer showed us some carbon trajectories and information about carbon footprints, and we had a really good discussion about our questions, which were, how robust are those calculations? What methods did they use? What portion of their data is estimated or actual emissions? And then, given the answers to those questions, how much confidence can we actually place in what they were presenting to us? I thought we had asked them to go away and tell us more about that, and that, hoping at some time in the future we might hear back from them those answers, unless that's already happened at the investment subcommittee.
Yeah, we spoke to Mercer. Sorry, it's a bit loud, a bit close. We spoke to Mercer, and they are putting together a report which will be taken to the ISC, but I'll make sure it's sent on to yourself as well.
Chris.
Thank you for going back to the action log. There was one item which is in the action log going back to the June meeting, which struck me as being potentially worrying, and that's to do with the ring-fenced undecided leavers backlog. That's item number 195. My apologies. And it is, of course, very good to see that there has been basically a 2/3 reduction in the number of individuals in that backlog over the last 3 years, and that's good. What surprised me was that the oldest undecided leaver cases are from more than 10 years ago. And I just wondered and worried, are there individuals involved here who could be significantly affected by this backlog, or is this purely an administrative exercise which has no real effect on individuals? 10 years is an awful long time for someone for cases to be in a backlog, and I know that we see here that the oldest cases are now being prioritized, which is of course good, but I'm just would like some assurance that we're not dealing here with cases where individuals may be significantly impacted.
Yes, thank you. It's a legitimate question because I mean I think when we discussed it at the previous meeting, I explained that we had a number how we prioritised, and actually there were a number of things that were more critical to the member than actually simply looking at the age of the case. For example, those who are retiring, those in fact the whole cohort who are 55 plus, because they can now voluntarily leave at any point in time. We were trying to reduce volumes by if you like quick wins, because that would get the numbers down quicker. We've got on-demand casework where things are happening, including where employers are having exercises. Under 2-year cases are a priority because they've got transfers which it has a greater timeline. And then McLeod has created other backlogs as we've gone through, which we then need to go back and address within the backlog, which is all very thing. So I guess to reassure you, if the member's going to be impacted in terms of needing money, we absolutely are all over that. So that's the first thing. We have now moved things around, but so I've just lost my train of thought there. Yeah, but I don't think I think I'm comfortable where we are. Let's put it that way. But what we were finding when we looked at some of the older cases were, for example, we couldn't actually physically process them through because the member needed to claim what's called a guaranteed minimum pension. So, for example, the record's sitting there as a status 2, an unprocessed leaver. We couldn't process it through as a deferred pension because the member had an entitlement to immediately have a very small, it's equivalent to the state pension. If they reach state pension age, you're entitled to that. And the member hadn't contacted us. We've tried to trace them, we couldn't find them. And so some cases were sitting there with us unable to actually have contact with them. So we couldn't process those through. The majority, I think, of the other cases are not just straightforward leavers in the sense that they've left a single job and exited the fund entirely. What they've got is they've got a whole suite of jobs going on at the same time, and they've got options to amalgamate and things like that. So it's not if you like, a clean leaver. It's someone who's still in the fund and still has a relationship a lot of the time. But yeah, I think it's fair to say we are now trying to get through those early ones, whilst also still juggling all the other priorities as well. It's a very complex situation, and unfortunately not a straightforward answer.
Associated with this, it's unfortunately a national issue, probably an international one, but there's an awful lot of money when you add it all up together, which is stuck in unclaimed pensions, effectively, which are lost pensions, I think sometimes they're called, where people just lose track of the pension rights that they've got and the pension that they've accumulated. And it always seems to me to be a great shame that individuals, some of whom may well be really needing those pension payments, that they are unaware of the pension payments, the pension rights that they've got, having lost the connection to the pension fund. And I know that you will everyone uses tracing services. I just wonder if there's anything further we can do in terms of publicity, maybe, to try to get a wider awareness of the fact that if you did work for a relevant employer many years ago, do contact us, do contact the fund to see if there is a payment which is due to you.
I mean, there are obviously pension awareness campaigns that go on nationally, but this is the driver for the dashboard program. So the pension dashboard program has been designed to help people get in contact with their providers. So hopefully there'll be an easing of the issue. I mean, don't get me wrong, we haven't got huge quantities. I think the probably refunds is the one which we get where we lose contact the most, which are obviously incredibly small pots. As opposed to pensions. But yes, so as we'll see later, the dashboard program, the connection date's October 25, should launch in 26. That will enable people to very easily get access to, to make an inquiry, and then we will be able to establish contact and deal with their pension.
Just a quick one. I think on a later item, you detailed the amounts of pensioners that you've lost touch with because of their addresses, as you can't find them that way. So I think that's kind of, the basis of all the the collection. It is some basis of all the collection issues. And I just wondered whether there was any quick way for people to update their addresses, perhaps on the website, or via employers when they notify their employer that they've changed. Could it be a prompt that the employer says now contact the pension fund? And also, as unions, we have to do a lot of data cleansing. So when we find out that somebody's moved address, could there be an easy prompt that we give to say now contact the pension fund? And maybe that would all help. Just awareness of you've got to keep in touch with the pension fund, kind of thing.
Yes, I mean, and anything you can do to prompt members would be fantastic. I think so we have just under 30,000 active members, and we should have an address for every single active member, because the file which comes through the employer provides that detail each month. So the problem is we have 100,000 members just under in total, so lots of members who aren't active. And we can lose, every time someone moves, they've got to remember to update it. So that's where the problem is. I guess pensions, in a sense, can be a little bit easier as well, because if we we can obviously suspend a pension if necessary, if we think we've completely lost contact, for example. But there's in the middle, you've got a huge number of deferred beneficiaries. I think it's deferred beneficiaries. We've got 58,000, and they're the ones I think we lose contact with the most.
I don't know if it's a silly question, but is there a government database linked to national insurance number, which could be linked to the pension, which would help? But because obviously national insurance numbers is unique.
Well, we have an NI database which we use for establishing whether people have other pension service elsewhere. But beyond that, no, I mean, we've got our mechanisms for tracing people is pretty much using a tracing provider or going to the DWP. But they only tend to have the address sometimes once they've reached state pension age and claim their state benefit. So that proved to be pretty poor for establishing contact within career effectively. But I'm not aware of any. Sorry, we're connected to NI where we would be able to get address.
Well, no, I was just thinking, presumably related to the national insurance number, the most recent address for any individual would be held by the government, and I just wondered whether that would be of any assistance at all. That's all.
I think the address tracing providers, perhaps Michelle, you can come in on this. They use a suite of standard data sources to be able to do the trace. I'm not sure if you're aware of anyone like that.
No, I think also we have to be very careful when we're looking at address tracing in terms of GDPR as well. So obviously when we procure our services, we have to go through really robust processes to make sure that obviously well, firstly, the quality of the data that we're going to get back, and also that they're, you know, up to speed with GDPR requirements as well. I'm not aware of any kind of other function that we could get that information from. I suppose it could open up other questions about if we've got access to it, could other people wrongly get access to it, and how all that would work. So I think the strongest mechanisms we've got is member self-service. If we can promote that as much as possible so that people are in control themselves. Obviously, there's security questions that members have to go through to get into that member self-service. So if people can update their addresses that way, that's the most preferred way of doing it. But then secondary to that, obviously, is to use our address tracing service that obviously give us a confidence score against each address that they find. So even then, we don't 100% know where they are, but we will then start a verification process, because obviously what we don't want is any data breaches in the meantime, because we think we found the right person and it's not, and that type of thing. So I think they're probably the two main mechanisms that we'd probably use or do use.
No, thanks very much. And I understand that GDPR may well play a part in this, but I thought I'd just ask the question. Thank you.
There's also an issue that there are a lot of people who have protected NI numbers. So even if you search for the NI number, you struggle to actually get a return from it. So it isn't a perfect system. You know, prevents some of us being able to complete anything with HMRC online. Okay, so we're actually just being asked to note the action log. So as long as we're happy to do that, we will move on to item 5 then, which is the Pension Fund Annual Business Plan Update Report for 24-25. Head of Pensions will introduce the report. Mark.
Thank you. And I'll go through the RAG status, but also touch on the AMBERs and touch on a couple of others that I've moved on as well. So the RAG status is on page 42. The first AMBER, the procurement of an integrated service provider. So this is, as we'll discuss later, who connects us to the pension dashboard ecosystem. We have procured Haywood, our main software supplier, to fulfill that function. So this will move back to green at the next meeting once we get the insights report in that we were waiting for, which is related to the signing of that contract. The next one I wanted to mention was the IC contract extension on page 44. So at the last ISC, we did agree to a 2-year extension, which we have effected, and we'll be obviously exploring sort of more specialist, sort of more granular breakdown of the services whilst keeping a retained advisor is probably the best way of describing it. The McLeod is AMBER. Page 48 contains the detail. This is AMBER because effectively the timelines have been squeezed due to the late issue of guidance, moving goalposts actually, in that we now need to go out and get lots of detail regarding unaggregated membership that we didn't think we were going to have to when it first kicked off. Late sort of letters that are being produced centrally to enable us to contact members to get that information. But I think we'll move to be at a point where I'm comfortable that we've made the progress that we are able to make over the next couple of weeks. The next one, the undecided leavers, as I said before, we're holding that AMBER. I think the report actually shows decent progress within the year compared to my expectations. It has stalled the last couple of months over the summer period, in the sense that we haven't made the dents into that I wanted. I suppose the reassurance is that we've made considerable progress since our high point, which I think was about just nearly 10,000 aged cases. So the number reported here is quite significantly below that. The materiality of this, as we reduce also, and as the fund increases in size, obviously becomes less. But there are, at the end of the day, this is people who haven't got the information that they should have. So we're very aware of that. But the reason we've been held at AMBER is because of the pressures around everything else. Page 49, Engage. So this is the new software solution, sorry, the new member self-service solution. we'd reprofiled it, and we have now received an end of life letter from our software supplier for the current member self-service solution, which is for January 2026. So we are going to have to move to a updated version in good time for that. So I would suggest, because how critical it is, probably 6 months before we want to aim for. The issue, if you recall, I have discussed this before, is that we have some members who are in both the Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire Pension Fund, and like many funds or many admin teams who deal with more than one fund, their implementation is sort of a single implementation. And currently the access is through a username, so a different username for each fund. And the new system uses an email address. And because we want people to use a personal email address and not their work email address, because they can leave their job and move jobs, it would require 2 personal email addresses if they wanted to use each fund's self-service. So we've asked our software supplier to cut through this and resolve that problem, which they're assuring us they're doing. That's why we reprofiled the project, but now we're having to reprofile it at the next meeting to bring it back into the and deal with the end of life scenario. So very, very frustrating, but that's where we are. The final comment around the activities is on the website. So that will launch this by the end of the year, hopefully quite a bit, quite a bit before the end of the year. We have drafted pretty much every page, about 150 pages I think we've got of content. I think about half of them have been loaded up into the site ready for launch. So we're very well progressed on that. And as I say, we'll launch at end of year. My final comment on the entire report is around the climate action plan, which is page 61. And what you may have noticed is to aid the readability, we've brought the current and future actions to the very top and moved the legacy actions that we've completed to the end, because it was going to get very, very long as we move forward. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Members, any questions on this issue? Comments? Andrew?
Thank you. I just have a comment on page 57, action points, current ongoing actions. At the bottom of the page, it relates to the cyber insurance that we have at the moment. And I just wanted to question the status of that, the vulnerabilities that may exist due to its status, and also the time frame for conclusion.
I'm happy to pick up on that in private session, Chair, because of the sensitivities around that. I don't think it's something that we should be discussing in public session.
Yeah, I'm quite
That's
happy
okay.
for that to be
Sorry.
taken in
Okay.
private session, if you can just remind us when we get that.
Yes, okay.
Laura?
Thank you. In the climate action plan, we've got 3 items for Q3 2024. The third one is reconsider including scope 3 data. Can you tell us a bit more about progress on that, or any action that's happened on that one so far?
Yes, so I think we brought a proposal, if you like. So the ACT analysis, the analytics for the climate transition analysis, it comes each year. I think they're just finalising the information to come to the next meeting. Ben, is that correct? We did discuss scope 3, but we didn't feel we could bring it into the scope of the additions we were bringing to the report in this time round. Is that, Ben? Do you want to actually, Ben, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, we're speaking to Mercer a lot about this, and obviously our ACT report, so our carbon transition as well as the climate action plan, a lot of the data isn't that trustworthy or simply doesn't exist. So it's about the data becoming available. If you bring it in too soon, you might get some red herrings thrown in there. But we're definitely having the conversation about, as the data progresses and gets better, we start to evolve our reporting to include scope 3. But we certainly don't want to bring it in too early to give false readings of any sort.
I think on scope 3, I think the general feeling around scope 3 is the number will be fairly meaningless in the sense that we might have we might have different companies in the same value chain. And so effectively, we would clearly have, as a global investor, duplication. So it's the direction of travel. So once we start getting it, as long as we've got replicable. So I would hope it would be in by the next report, to be clear. We hoped it would be in this time, but actually we weren't able to do it.
Members, any other points on this? If not, we're being asked to note the business plan update. Hope we're happy to do so. Move on to item 6 then, which is the governance and compliance report, which will be introduced by the governance and regulations manager, Michelle.
Thank you. So there's a lot going on in this report. So I'll just mention any areas of in particular interest or any development since the report was produced. And just also to flag that because there is a separate pension dashboard report later on the agenda, we won't obviously pick that up in this report this time as we usually would. The report this time is slightly different order. So as this is the first governance and compliance report following the general election, I've started off the report by referencing the change from DLUC back to MHCLG, just so that I didn't obviously have to caveat the way through the report, depending on the timeline of things that have been happening over the period. So the report itself, the main update to the report really is under McLeod and the annual benefit statements. So in the report, obviously, it was talking about obviously a potential breach there. Since then, MHCLG have laid the LGPS information regulations. So they were laid on the 28th of August to come into force on the 23rd of September, but to be backdated from the 1st of October 23. This was obviously very to the wire, bearing in mind that the annual benefit statements had to be issued by the 31st of August. So we were all ready to report ourselves and to report a breach. But luckily, because that came in right at the last minute, we didn't have to. So effectively, what that means is we are compliant for the 23-24 annual benefit statements that have already gone out. However, what we will need to do is just be mindful when we reassess the 24-25 benefit statements, and I've flagged it in the Code of Practice report as well. We obviously need to make sure for 24-25 that we get the development work in to make sure that we're compliant at that point. But at the moment, we're all good. So just an update about local pension board. So we had a vacancy on the board that we've very recently been able to fill. So that's really good news. We had a really, really positive response rate to that recruitment exercise. Two things we might have done slightly differently that we think maybe have helped. So we put out a really wide coverage this time. So we sent the advert direct to members through employers and on the website. And we also used the new pension regulator EDI template as well. So we think that possibly the combination of the new design and plus the wider coverage has contributed to that as well. So that has been really positive. So on skills and knowledge, at the moment, 80% of committee members with a minimum of 12 months membership have completed the online training. Obviously, as we're not quite up to 100%, the next step would be to include that in the next version of the risk register. And obviously, in the meantime, if anybody hasn't undertaken the training, if that could be undertaken, that would be really good. There will be a survey circulated to committee members next week, and I believe you've received an email earlier this week, just to kind of look out for it. So this will be on the online training platform that we've been doing our mandatory training on. really important. It's a really short survey. I think it's just 12 questions, just generally how you've felt the online training has gone. Really happy to have any feedback that you've got on that we can deliver back. And more importantly, it will help to determine the training strategy going forward, whether we're happy to keep that approach for refresher training or whether anybody's got any other ideas, and we'll obviously review those when they come in. We did delay that slightly, so the training strategy will be delayed slightly, and we did that just because it was due to go out over the summer period. Obviously, members very busy having, summer breaks. There was also the effectiveness review that we sent out around that time, and I know Ben's team was sending out things as well, so we obviously didn't want to bombard you. But hopefully now is a more suitable time to get that out. So next week that should be with you. And the only other thing to mention is in the report under sections 11.2 and 11.3, obviously just the progress we've made on the policy and strategy updates. 11.2, obviously the ones that we've undertaken, if you're happy with those, and 11.3 is the rescheduled plan of when the next ones are due to come back to you. But apart from that, I've got no further comments.
Right. First of all, Alan, welcome. Please, you can make it. We're on item 5.
Okay, thank you. Apologies, it's taken me over 2 hours. The A14 is basically shut just between Fen Ditton and Quay, Stoke and Quay.
I'm not surprised with some of the standard of some of the driving I saw yesterday. In that heavy rain that we had, I'm really surprised there hasn't been more. Okay, members, questions on this item? I'm looking around the room. No one seems to have anything for you today. So, in which case, then we are being asked to note the governance and compliance report, and I hope we're happy to do so. Thank you. So move on to item 7, admissions and cessations, which is going to be introduced by the head of pensions. Mark, over to you.
Thank you. I actually have nothing to add to the report. I think it's a fairly straightforward one in terms of, looking at the admission of some bodies, cessation, and an update on one where we've not paying out an exit credit.
Members, do you have any questions, any points on the admissions and cessations? In which case, we are being asked to note the admissions of the following transfer admission bodies to the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund and approve the sealing of the admission agreements. NextGen Group, Knightsbridge Commercial Cleaning Services, Lunchtime Company, Total Clean Services, Aspen Services, ABM Catering, VHS Cleaning, GSO Trading as Reef Cleaning. And secondly, to note the cessation of admission agreements in relation to the following employers: Collections Trust, Pabulum Trust, Goshen Multi-Services, NextGen Services, Taylor Shaw, Lunchtime Company, Aspen Services, Serco. And thirdly, we're being asked to note the update on the previously reported cessation of an admission agreement in relation to Churchill Contract Services. Trust we're happy to do all of that. Thank you. Please don't ask me to say it again. Okay, we'll move on to item 8, which relates to the overpayment of pension entitlement and debt recovery policy. The report will be introduced by the Governance and Regulations Manager. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. So this policy was actually due for just an officer review this time round, but we felt it was appropriate to bring it back to the committee because when we were reviewing, we felt it probably needed a slight change in direction. So the policy itself has actually been in place since 2015, but it's always focused on member overpayments. Upon this review, it was felt that actually maybe we should start to look at wider than just member and look at employer and any miscellaneous debts also, just so that we could demonstrate that we were applying policy in a consistent and fair manner. So the policy also recognises that obviously we're bringing employers as a stakeholder into this policy, but also that there might be situations where employers actually might be struggling for one reason or another. So obviously it helps to open up that dialogue there as well. So the debts are being managed behind the scenes and always have been. The purpose of the policy is not out of any concern that we're suddenly worried about the volume or the amount of debt. It's more about good governance and actually having a transparent policy that employers can see also. So in line with the original policy, any write-off applications still need to be approved in line with the schedule in section 20 as part of a robust process. Key to this policy is probably the practical guidelines that we're developing behind the scenes also. So we're currently working on those effectively for our pension officers to be able to make the decisions and the considerations for all overpayments, what needs to be thought about if we are getting to the point where we're thinking possibly about writing off an overpayment, whether it's for an employer or a member. Actually, what kind of evidence we would want from each of those, the discussion process, and at what point we obviously get to that point as well. And obviously for employers and members, that would be quite you know, a one-on-one situation depending on a member or an employer's experience and what the situation is there. So we've already shared this policy with the local pension board. So they've looked at this policy as a pre-scrutiny item, which resulted in an additional and an explanation of the £250 write-off at the start of the member overpayment, which also references the GMP and HMRC sections. We've also added in section 8.5, which was to ensure that any aggregated overpayments or debts would be raised with the committee and the section 151 officer if they got to a level that we deemed as being material to the fund. So probably actually quite an important one there that we've added in, because obviously lots of small debts on their own might not trigger anything, but we obviously need to be looking more holistically if there was several of those. The next version of the policy, it was requested from the local pension board that we update the examples in Appendix 1, which we will do for the next version of that. But for now, the committee is asked to approve this policy as it is, if you're happy with that, but happy to take any questions or comments.
Members, questions, comments, concerns, anything? We're quite happy with the changes that are being proposed here. Okay, in which case we are being asked to approve the overpayment of entitlement and debt recovery policy. Are we happy to do so? Yeah, no one against? No abstentions? Thank you. Right, so we move on to item 9, which is the General Code of Practice Compliance, Governance and Regulation Management. We'll introduce the report. So over to you again, Michelle.
Thank you. And the last one from me, you'll be pleased to hear. So the General Code of Practice, as you know, has been enforced since March. And since that time, we've been reviewing the requirements of the code, leading to us really coming to a decision that actually, because we wanted to do a really good, robust job on it, we've split it into 3 elements. So what we've done is, for this particular meeting, we've obviously prioritised the regulatory requirements against the code. Stage 2, that we've actually already just started looking at now, is against the compliance against the pension regulator expectations. And then stage 3, we will look at the compliance against the best practice modules. So effectively 3 stages as in a kind of risk-based approach with that. So in the report, we provided a summary of the compliance against the modules. So these are the modules that just apply to the LGPS. Obviously, the code itself is wider than the LGPS, so this has been very focused on us specifically and where we fit into the code. And then in section 3.4, we've obviously put in there about the 2 things that we have identified as a partial compliance. and the actions that we're going to undertake to obviously resolve those. So the first one was quite a straightforward one. So we already had a conflicts of interest register in place, and actually we'd already had that in place for some time because we preempted that was going to be a requirement of the code. But when the code was delivered, there was an actual a separate piece on there that was asking about the board conflicts of interest to be circulated with the board and more widely published, so that we've completed that action already, so we're fully compliant on that one now. The second action was a little bit more involved, and this is to do with leavers that are due either a CTS or a refund. So what we do have, which is why it's partially compliant, we've got the processes in place to identify leavers who are entitled to either of those. But what we didn't have was the reporting mechanisms to establish whether the information was being provided in a timely manner. So although this could be done manually, so if we were asked for that information, we could look through all that data and find out. But what we really wanted to do for, you know, better governance is actually get that into an automated process or a new KPI, so that we can automatically see every month that actually that is being done in a timely manner. So that KPI is currently in development. We're hoping to have that up and running in December, and then we can obviously start reporting on that very shortly after as well. We're also obviously, as mentioned earlier, with the annual report guidance that's come out, we're kind of looking at it in relation to that as well. So effectively what it will mean is 2 new KPIs on refunds. One will be the physical payment of a refund. The second one will be in line with the information being provided in a reasonable time as well. And we think by doing both of those, we'll have really good reporting around this area that we can bring to you. So for reassurance, Hyman Robinson, our governance advisors, and we asked them to undertake an independent desktop review, just because obviously it's the first time that or any fund is undertaking this, and we just wanted to make sure that we were understanding each criteria the way that it was intended, and obviously making sure that there was no bias. So that was agreed and an outcome there. There were 2 further recommendations, not fundamental to the actual compliance, but that would strengthen our evidence going forward. So the first one was an independent assessment of the IDRP process. So what I'll do based on that is I'll investigate what that entails, and obviously any costs associated with that, and come back to you on that, and then we can decide whether we want to go ahead with that. The second point was to consider whether any knowledge or confidence assessment should be undertaken. So this forms part of the regulatory compliance, but actually it comes in very strongly. We've started obviously looking at the pension regulator expectations. It comes in very strongly there as well. And it's about obviously being able to demonstrate that as a committee, you have the skills and the knowledge to be able to undertake your roles. We've done some work on that. So obviously the online system, there's obviously modules at the end and, you know, a few questions at the end that you need to pass. There's also the effectiveness reviews, where obviously anybody that answers, you know, in a disagree capacity, then we're obviously going to pick those up and say, oh, further training might be needed in these areas. But it probably will need something a bit more formal going forward. Again, I'm up to any thoughts about that, because we have had formal knowledge assessments in the past. Not everybody is a fan of formal, you know, dare I say it, tests in that manner, and, you know, where we're recording it. Whether a confidence assessment would be appropriate, as a committee, maybe we could consider that, but they're kind of 2 things that we probably do need to consider going forward. And as mentioned, the progress on the other two stages. So there's 88 requirements for us still to look at, and we'll bring those back to you in 2 stages by the end of the financial year. But that's really just about where we are in the code of practice, and obviously any associated actions with that. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. And obviously the training issue, really do need to get us as high as we can in terms of compliance with that. Members' questions, Chris?
Thank you, Chair. On that last issue to do with the modules and the short tests there is at the end, my recollection is that the pass rate, the pass rate you need to achieve in order to have a pass is 0%. You don't actually need to answer any of the questions correctly in order to pass the test. Now, what I did each time, if I didn't get 100%, I went back, redid it until I did get 100% to reinforce the areas where clearly I didn't have the knowledge. But the actual test itself, you can go through the whole lot, answer every question correctly, and you've done the training.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's why it's a bit of a balance, isn't it, between, yes, there's something in place, but maybe not as robust as maybe the pension regulator is kind of wanting. So it's on here, and it'll be on an action, obviously, for the pension regulator expectations as well. So it will probably come back to the committee to have a more, formal. I think the wording is something like we need to be able to audit that we've got a compliant, committee that have got the appropriate skills and knowledge. So we definitely do need to do something, but I guess the question is about what the committee are comfortable with in what that looks like, I guess, where we are at the moment.
I must admit, I didn't realise that you could get through with 0%. Clearly it would be good to have a minimum pass rate, even if that is kind of not a published result. It's just that you've actually passed. I think there should be a fail point on there, so you've got to go back and retake the module. Adela.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I was just wondering if there are other providers similar to the ones that gave us the training, because they can't be the only ones, surely. There must be others out there who provide this sort of training, and have you sort of investigated that possibility?
Thank you. So interestingly, when we first looked at obviously putting this in place, they were the only providers that were specialising LGPS specifically. We had different governance advisors at the time, and we actually asked them if it was something that they were looking at developing, and they said they weren't. I suppose because it's quite a niche market, but I think because we've moved on since then now, what I will do is I will recheck on that just to see if anything else is in the market. I don't know, Mark, if you know of anything that's developed. I haven't heard of anything, but we'll certainly try and find out.
I'm not, and indeed, Hyman's they did corner the market in the sense that other providers. So we had Aon as our governance and benefits advisor. They actually designed some modules which they ran, but then the problem was that they weren't going to update them any further, and so they were effectively out of date if a member joined, say, 2 years later. So I think Hyman's are the only one.
Just as a matter of information, I'm a member also of the Pension Fund Board for the City of London Corporation, and they have a completely different set of modules and questions from a different provider. So if you were to contact the City of London, you may find some information which might be useful.
As a relatively new member of the committee, I can confirm there are some modules where there is a minimum pass rate, which I may or may not need to repeat. But I would say that I do think that having the minimum pass rate is appropriate, mostly because you are able to download the script and the slides to have sitting along next to you while you're taking the quiz, in the same way that would be realistic when someone is reading papers and needs to go away and reference something before understanding it. So I think that's reasonable.
Okay, members, any other points on this? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So we're being asked to note the regulatory compliance check against the General Code of Practice. We're happy to do so. Thank you. The next item is the pensions dashboard update, and Head of Pensions will introduce the report. Over to you, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We've obviously been bringing you updates generally about the dashboard programme through the governance report. What we will be doing going forward is bringing you a separate report around our progress against effectively what is quite a significant project. So this is the first time we've done that. What we'll be able to also therefore do is have a very clear audit trail of any, what we've communicated, any decisions that you need to make as a committee. One of the things about the programme and what the regulator has made very, very clear is the need to have a clear audit trail and retain that audit trail for a number of years around how you decided various things. So, for example, one of the things we'll be discussing in a very near future will be matching criteria as to how we decide how we want to, when we get a request coming in from a member through the system, how we want to match to that member and then send data back. Just a couple of really important dates. So 31st of October 25 is the connection deadline for the LGPS. So that's effectively what we're working to. The dashboard available point is an important date, but it is unknown. What we've been told, so the dashboard available point is the point at which the general public and therefore our members will be able to access the dashboards and the data. We've been told there'll be at least 6 months warning. So you would think that the earliest it could possibly be would be, at least a few months experience once we connect to see how it's going, and then 6 months from there. That feels like it's the earliest it could possibly be. So it will be some point in 2026, obviously. Just going through the report, I'll just bring out a few things. Our method of connection, I've mentioned we procured Hayward as a software supplier. That's set out in 3.1. We've got effectively a two-phase project to connect. Pre-staging and testing is phase 1. That's going to take place around January 25. And then the second phase is the actual physical connection to the ecosystem, and that will take place sometime between April and October 25. We don't want to leave it too late, but we'll be finalising the details towards the end of this year. 3.5 sets out data matching, and as I just said, we will bring back a proposal as to how to match. It's really important because whether something matches first time or it's a partial match actually has a timeline implication. If there's a match and we can't send the data back, we've got just 10 working days to send that data back. It's a slightly different timeline if there's a partial match. So it is a critical decision. Section 3.13 goes through the data provided back to members, and I think that's a really important section for you to understand. The data we're providing is really quite high level. This does not provide as much information as our member self-service solution. So member self-service, the individual can model different retirement dates. They can model different commutation options. All we're doing here is providing a few items of flat data back to the dashboard ecosystem. And so if the member wants more detail, they will still need to register for self-service as things currently stand. Section 3.14, 18 and 22 are really important. They set out the record keeping, the reporting, and the failure to comply elements of this project. As I said, I think the biggest eye opener for us was just the amount we need to record on our RAID log around decision making, and make sure we've got an audit trail of those decisions. So things we've got on there already are things like the approval of the budget through the business plan and who we were going to utilize as the software provider. So we've kind of been using other reports for this, but going forward, we'll put them in a single report. The project here and data improvement, I would say, is another element. It ties into the data improvement plan you saw earlier. The common data score element of that was probably something quite critical to this project, where particularly, where if we don't make sure we've got things like address data, that may hinder our matching for certain common names, for example. The key matching criteria will obviously be the national insurance number, because that's our primary identifier. So that's fantastic, bear in mind early comments, of course, by the chair. The project plan, it is a significant project. I mean, we've already got a couple of 100 lines of activity on it. And as we get deeper into it, we build out certain parts. So there are still parts which are a bit unknown. I think some of the post-connection testing, so exactly what we're going to be able to achieve after we've connected to the ecosystem, but before we go live with the dashboard available point, our ability to test and what we can test, bear in mind there won't be live data coming in. That's really critical. So we do need to do some further work around what that looks like. The other element I do want to be able to get a handle on as well is the business as usual workflow processes and how they're going to work, and therefore and have try to work out in some way what the resource requirement is around this, because we really don't know what the volumes are going to be. The only sort of idea or estimate we can get is, I guess, from other countries that have put in place dashboard programs. Please note the revised budget in 5.1, which has gone down. So the implementation costs we've revised, and we'll continue to do that as more is known. But I think apart from that, Chair, I think that's everything I wanted to go through, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I think it's obviously quite a complicated project to get all of this right. But yeah, it's kind of good that it's moving forward. Let's just hope that everything works when we get there. Lara.
Thank you, Chair. Can you give us an example of a partial match? What does that mean?
Yes, so if the primary match is on NI, so we'll probably just use the first 8 digits of the, or eight characters of the NI, should I say, because they are the unique elements. If that was a nil match, but the date of birth and surname was a match, I think that would be treated as a partial match. And that just means there's obviously we would come in and we would make sure we've got a match through liaison with that member. So that's an example.
Final question on this one. In Michelle's earlier governance report, she mentioned that TPR has started a nudge campaign in July, so that there's communications going out on this topic. Have we seen any uptake in questions from our members or the public following that?
I don't recall a single question. That's kind of, I mean, to be fair, well, we obviously have a team that mans the phones, but I'm not aware of any widespread communication. I mean, ultimately, it's a number of years off. So it's 2020. It could be mid 2026, probably at the earliest when it goes live. We'll be connected before then, but so up until then, it's very much, the focus is on member self-service. But as mentioned again earlier, I'd hope that it's going to improve the take-up of member self-service, as well as, get a healthy amount of activity through the dashboard program. The key thing is making it as automated as possible, so that we don't have to have any manual contact points as we deal with these cases.
Okay, members, any other questions? Okay, so we're being asked then to note the contents of the report and note the changes to the budget associated with the pensions dashboard programme, and trust we're happy to do so. So move on to item 11, which is the annual reports for 23-24, and this will be introduced by Investments and Fund Accounting Manager. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's probably a report you recognise, many of you. Usually we produce this alongside the statement of accounts. This year we've separated the statement of accounts and the annual report really for the ease of the pension committee and the audit committee. You'll still see it's a 69-page document, but it's not the 170 something that it was with the statement of accounts attached. So really it's a chance for you to examine and analyse that more, and hopefully it's helpful to the reader just to have the annual report on its own. It will be going to the audit committee later this month to note. What I will say is the annual report is the responsibility of the pension committee to sign off. The statement of accounts, which is now separated from this, is the responsibility of the audit committee. So pension committee for annual report, statement of accounts for annual audit committee. It's been done along the same processes and by the same team as in previous years. This year there is some changes to the guidance from the SAB, that's the Scheme Advisory Board, details of which are in the table in section 3. That's on page 158 of the pack. Really, these are just movements between what is a must, a should, and a may. So the main one to pick out is probably the value for money summary, which we've now included. That's now a must, so we've got that in there. Another key thing we've added this year is also a summary report, really to make it a bit more user-friendly and a bit more easily readable to the reader. I know it's quite bulky, and because we have to follow the guidance really, and the guidance makes it a bit like that. So we've tried to make it a bit more friendly where we can. I wasn't planning on doing a page turner, but I'm quite happy to take any questions or comments. Just to touch on the recommendation, it is to approve the annual report for publication, and hopefully I've got Fiona online for any technical questions, because it's her and the team that have really done the lion's share of this work.
Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, making it user-friendly. Well, unfortunately, there isn't very much discretion here in terms of what has to be in here. So there is a very limited amount of user-friendliness which can be inserted into a 69-page report with a further 50-odd pages if you want to look at some of the more detailed reports which are behind it. And I looked at this with, my heart just sank when I opened it up and saw how long it was. Again, it happens every year. I'm disappointed about it. So I thought I'd do something different this time. I thought, let's just have a look at the chairman's forward, which is only 1 page long, and the 4-page summary. I thought, if I were someone from the outside looking at this and facing either 69 pages or 120 odd pages, I think I'd be tempted, if I were a non-expert, I'd be tempted just to look at those documents. And what I saw there rather surprised me in one particular respect, and it's something which will be automatically corrected next year, but will again go wrong in the year following unless we take appropriate action. And that was the comment that was made both by you, Chairman, in your forward and in the summary about the funding level for the scheme as a whole. Now, we've had a discussion about how relevant the funding level is, but it is a number which is a very well-known number. And what surprised me in the report, and I've not noticed it before, is that the only number which is mentioned isn't the number which was the funding level as of the 31st of March 24. It goes back to the last actuarial valuation. So all the funding level, which presumably has been repeated year after year since 22, is the funding level as of the 31st of March 22. You very helpfully, Chair, in your forward, mentioned that it has improved since. And if we look at the actuarial statement, which is on page 67, we see the comment that it is, I don't know if they said hoped or expected, that the figure will be better when the next actuarial valuation takes place on the 31st of March 25. But we actually know within this committee what the real figure is currently, and we're failing to give that information. I think it's really important information to know how the funding level has changed from the last last actuarial valuation up till now. So failing to give that information, that up-to-date information to members, I found was surprising. But in addition to that, I think that, and I certainly think this is the case for 31st March 25. I think we need, even in your chairman's summary, let alone the 4-page summary, I think we also will need in future to have an explanation about the limitations of the value of that particular bit of knowledge, that particular data point. It is an important data point, but as we know, it has its limitations. So having that information about the limitation of that number might be helpful, especially given what that number may be when this report comes back next time.
I think from my point of view, when I looked at it, what I was loath to do was put in a figure which appears to suggest a significant overfunding of the fund, bearing in mind those significant limitations. Bearing in mind your first comments around the size of this report anyway, I suspect it would take at least a page to actually adequately describe why that is an issue. And therefore it seems, you know, that putting in a much simpler phrase seemed more appropriate. But officers, perhaps you have a comment. Mark.
If I may, Chair, I think the reason I think the reason we're comfortable putting in a previous valuation, because that evaluation, the assets are known, the liabilities are valued by the actuary. Anything that happens during the intervaluation period is effectively a estimate, a roll forward position. It's not a valuation of the liabilities of the fund, and therefore to treat it with the same, you know, so there's more caution, I guess, associated with it, accepting all the limitations, because ultimately I do see that value is partly, you know, you decide the confidence you want in a particular discount rate as part of the process of setting, which directly leads to this headline figure, which has limitations. We are, I think, as was intimated by Mercer at the ISC meeting, we are looking at another way of framing where we are with regards to the assets of the fund and what genuinely is effectively a surplus in inverted commas. So that's one thing I would add. I think we have the big change this year was the executive summary. So that wasn't present before. So you have got a digest of the report as well. That was to try to aid the readability, accepting that not everyone's going to read through it. It is very hard to cut down comments to a single page for the chairs forward and try to bring through the character of what's in the report. The final thing, if I could just check that I need to correct the record, Ben, the one thing we didn't do this year was the VFM assessment. Even though it was a must, there was discretion in the first year if you weren't able to do it. And I think we did call out in the report that that's the one thing we didn't do. I just checked. So Fiona's nodding on the screen. Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
That's correct.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit disappointed in your answer, Chair, because you clearly showed due diligence in considering the matter, and then you decided it was appropriate not to disclose this to the world and maybe more importantly, to members of the pension scheme. And accepting the qualifications that must be in terms of the interpretation of the number, it is a fairly important issue that members have confidence that the scheme is fully funded. And most definitely, if you were to have given the current estimate that there is of the liabilities and therefore the funding level, that would have given quite a lot of confidence to members, I think, that there's certainly going to be sufficient funds available to pay pensions when they fall due. But my problem in principle on this lies almost in the other direction. Let us say, for example, and we know it's not the case, instead of the funding level, the estimate of the funding level having increased substantially since 2022, let's say it had been falling. And let's say we were aware that the figure is now 80% or 70%. I most definitely would want that estimate to be not just reported here, but to be explained. And I think that we have a responsibility to members to give them reasonably up-to-date information about something which is as simple and straightforward, but possibly misleading, about the difference between the level of investments we've got and the estimate of the liabilities that we've got. Now, next year, this won't be a problem because, of course, we will be reporting on the new actuarial valuation as of the 31st of March 2025. So there'll be no lag. But 26, 27, we'll again see this lag between what the 25 figures show and what we believe the estimate to be. And I think that's something to be thought about. I appreciate this won't come up for 2 years now, but I think there's something to be thought about providing a better indication about how things have changed since the last actuarial valuation than merely your comment, which I do appreciate, saying things have improved since then. And I appreciate that that has been put in. Additionally, though, since we will have the new figure coming out next year for the actuarial valuation as of the 31st of March 25, I think it's absolutely essential that consideration is given now, or in the next few months, to how we will explain the number which comes up. And I think that really is important, partly to avoid any accusations which may be made by people who take a single figure and read far too much in it, but also to inform members of what it means.
I think your statement at the end actually answers your question at the beginning. All right. And I think that that's all there is to say about it. I mean, you know, it is in there. Would it be appropriate if the fund was in a negative position? I think there would be an awful lot more to say. Ben.
Thank you. Yeah. Again, coming back to the point that we've split the annual report and the statement of accounts. In the statement of accounts, in the going concern, we do have an updated funding position. So if you, a lot of the readers will see it, the annual report with the statement of accounts, it is in the going concern, the statement of accounts, the funding level change.
Must admit I'd missed that it was also that it was in the statement of accounts, but that makes it all the more relevant for it to be in the annual report as well, so that an explanation can be given as to what it means, what its importance is. There's no need for us to hide it in the annual report if it is also reported in the financial statements.
So I think from there we have that point, Lara.
New point? Okay. Well, I didn't have the same sinking feeling when I saw the report in front of me, luckily. But that's mainly because my conclusion was that we're reporting on a larger than expected return, less than expected management expenses, less than expected admin expenses. I think that's in a good position to be. But my one concern was about, sorry to bring up this old chestnut, the carbon trajectory that's included. I was really hoping to see some levels of confidence noted, or some error bars, or something just to give a flavor to the reader of how much confidence we have in that trajectory. Maybe something again to think about for next year.
Happy to take that on board for next year. Again, there's quite stringent guidance, so we need to make sure we don't go too far outside the frameworks, but I can certainly take your point forward for next year.
Members, any other points on here? If not, we're being asked to approve the annual report 23-24 for publication. Are we happy to do so? Anyone against? Okay, in which case that is then approved unanimously. Thank you. And we will move on to item 12, which is agenda plan. Are there any questions on the agenda plan? Nothing on there at all, no updates at all. In which case, we're just asked to note that. The remaining items, agenda items, are exempt from publication, so the subcommittee will need to decide whether to exclude the public and press from the remainder of the meeting while these are discussed. Mike, I believe you had some comments to make around confidential items.
Oh, yes, thanks, Chair. I just did want to say, while we're still in public session, that I do wonder why some of these issues, in particular, looking here at the stewardship application and the access pool, and in particular, I think their of ethical investment criteria and the guidance on how they would treat ethical investment and intervene at companies' meetings and so on. I mean, those strike me as things that look quite appropriate to be discussed in public, and I was just wondering why some of these things are in the confidential session. Thanks.
I think it's appropriate that we look, and perhaps we could ask officers to think carefully about items which are being put into confidential session, and ask that we are being certain that there are good reasons for that to be done. And if that could, perhaps we could start actually reviewing that for the next meeting. Would that suffice?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I did just want to make this point while we're still in public session. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so this exclusion would be on the grounds that reports contain exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. That is, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. So is there a consensus that we move into to exclude press and public from the remainder of the session? Thank you. As the committee has resolved to move into private session, we will now close the public session of the meeting, and the live stream will end shortly. Thank you to any members of the public or press who may have been watching.